Today, we're diving into a pretty radical idea. We're going to explore what happens when a profound psychological crisis isn't a breakdown at all, but actually a painful and totally necessary breakthrough. What if the real trauma is the shock of finally seeing the truth?
So let's start with that question right there. What if the most disorienting, earth-shattering moments of our lives aren't a sign that our system is failing? What if, instead, that the system's desperate, maybe even healthy, attempt to break through a fundamental lie that we just can't live with anymore? All right, so to really get this, we have to start with a whole new way of understanding this kind of experience. We need to shift away from seeing it as some kind of illness or pathology, and instead view it as a deep, structural injury to the very foundation of our identity.
And here's that shift in a nutshell. The traditional view, on the left, it basically pathologizes everything. It says, there's something wrong with you, and these symptoms are the proof. But this structural view on the right, it flips the script completely. It argues that the symptoms, the anxiety, the confusion, the pain, are a perfectly logical survival response when a core belief, a foundational lie that held your world together, is suddenly ripped away. Your system isn't broken, it's just reacting to being suddenly exposed to the raw truth.
The clinical term for this is epistemological trauma. Now I know that sounds super academic, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. The real injury isn't the event itself, it's the sheer overload. It's a rupture in your entire operating system for how you know and navigate the world, and it happens because an experience was just too big, too fast for your nervous system to possibly handle.
This quote just gets right to the heart of it all. The pain you feel during one of these crises, it's not new damage. No, it's the pain that was already there, but it was being numbed by all sorts of illusions and defense mechanisms. The breakthrough doesn't cause the wound, it just takes away the anesthesia. And feeling everything all at once, well, that's the shock.
So that brings us to our next section. If seeing the truth or having a moment of enlightenment is a good thing, then why does it feel so incredibly traumatic? Well, it all comes down to the mechanics of what happens when truth arrives way faster than our system can possibly integrate it.
To really get this, we have to start with a simple biological fact. Our bodies, our nervous systems, our brains, they all have limits. We are, by our very nature, finite, contained systems.
But unfiltered reality, the deep structural truth about existence, about ourselves, about the world, it's boundless, it's infinite. And whenever you pit a finite system against an infinite reality, you're setting the stage for a pretty catastrophic collision. And that collision, it's got a name, a nervous system catastrophe. This is that moment of total overload. It's when our limited biological hardware tries to download an infinite software package all at once. The system doesn't just get slow, it completely crashes into a state of systemic shock.
So what does that crash actually feel like inside our own skin? Let's get into the very real, physical price the body pays for this kind of existential overload. And I want to be clear, this isn't a metaphor. This is real neurobiology. When your system goes into overload, it registers a massive, 5-alarm threat. Your entire biology just shifts into crisis mode. Your vagus nerve, which is supposed to keep you calm, gets destabilized. Your stress axis, the HPA axis, starts flooding your system with cortisol. And the result? You get systemic inflammation, chronic hyperarousal, that feeling of being wired and tired all the time, and your sensory pathways become so sensitized that everyday light and sound can feel like an assault. The shock in the mind becomes a very real physical state in the body.
Carl Jung warned us about this. Unearned wisdom is exactly this. It's insight that you haven't yet built the psychological and biological capacity to hold. It's like trying to run the power of a lightning bolt through a standard household wire. That wire, your nervous system, is just going to get fried.
Okay, so how in the world do you recover from that kind of overload? If the problem is a failure to metabolize reality, then the solution has to be a protocol for recalibration. The goal isn't to run away from the truth, but to build a stronger biological and psychological container to actually be able to hold it.
And this recovery protocol rests on 4 essential pillars, and they have to happen in this specific order. You absolutely cannot rebuild your identity on a shaky, dysregulated foundation. So first, you have to calm the biological storm. Then, from that calmer place, you can move to forgiveness to release all that toxic stress. Only then is it even possible to start reforming your identity and finally build a new map for what gives your life meaning.
A huge part of calming the system is something called the grounding protocol. And this isn't just about trying to relax. It's a very intentional practice of balancing that shocking insight with deep, grounded serenity. You see this in certain types of meditation, for example. That serenity acts like a coolant for an overheated nervous system. Without it, the raw brightness of the truth just leads to complete sensory burnout.
And here is another powerful reframe for you. In this model, forgiveness has nothing to do with being a good or moral person. It's a pragmatic, biological strategy. See, holding on to anger and resentment literally keeps your body locked in a defensive, inflammatory state. Forgiveness in this context is a physiological release valve. It lowers that toxic load and allows your system to finally begin to heal.
Now let's talk about the final and maybe the most tricky stage of recovery. What happens after you've stabilized? Well, you're often left with this new, profound clarity, a vantage point where you can see things that others can't. And that new sight, it comes with its own unique challenge and a big responsibility.
This is the danger of what's called the weaponized lens. When you can suddenly see right through everyone's defenses, their masks, their illusions, there's this powerful, almost irresistible urge to point it all out, to expose them. But this model suggests that urge isn't a sign that you're somehow superior. It's actually a sign that your own unresolved, reactive patterns are still trying to run the show.
So the real path to maturity involves these key realizations. First, you have to accept that just because you see things clearly now, that doesn't mean your old emotional triggers have magically vanished. Second, you have to recognize that the urge to expose other people is really about you and your own internal patterns. And finally, you learn that true wisdom isn't just seeing the truth, it's learning to hold that clear insight without feeling that compulsion to use it as a weapon against anyone.
So, to bring this all home, we land on this really powerful summary. Existential shock is not a mental illness. It's the body's raw biological struggle to process a truth that is simply too big, too fast, and too overwhelming for its current structure. It's a metabolic crisis of reality itself. And that leaves us with this final, essential question to really ponder. Knowing that truth itself can be a traumatic force, maybe the real work isn't about finding the truth, but about building ourselves, our minds and our bodies, into a container that's strong enough to actually hold it without shattering. What does that kind of strength look like for you?